I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to part 3 of the Urban Plague lore breakdown. Now, this will be largely abnormalities and patron librarian lore in this, so let's get through this so we can get to the main story contents. Next we have the Singing Machine. Now, this is not a rogue AI that would be illegal in the city. This is an abnormality that makes music by grinding those that it lures into it in order to make it. It prefers human meat, but any meat thrown into it can make music out of it. It just doesn't last as long. Now, this music can mind control employees in the facility. Basically, if an employee has too much fortitude or too little temperance, it will lure an employee towards it. And then they'll jump into it. Then it will mind control another employee to hunt for more to throw into it. Also, that the singing machine can play more music in order to have others hear more of it. But certainly not because entertainment is scarcer than effective legal firearms in that city. This music-playing meat grinder operates differently in the library, as it had employees that were addicted to music already in that book as it plays. As for the singing machine's behavior, it plays music to make the addicted employees do its bidding. As for the addicted employees themselves, they see any music that isn't made from an internal meat grinder as noise, wanting to throw more bodies into it to create a sweeter melody, wanting it to continue, inviting others to hear it, and when meat is craved, they start to lose their minds, believing that their victims want to be killed to generate music, seeing it as having a price that's worth paying with murder, not tolerating any erratic or filthy noises, and when the performance starts, they're enraptured by it, wanting it to continue, hinting at losing it if it stops. I mean, if it sounded anything like ABBA, I'd get a flamethrower and melt it down quicker than you can say, "Hasta la vista, baby." Yesod is aware of what happens to those that are allured and warns others not to be. He can't comprehend how anyone would be so desperate to hear that. As for his assistants, they're more emotional and see them as unstable and insane. They're referring to the addicted employees that they're forced to fight. As for the singing machine's stage, that's a grey room with a floor that has bare wooden planks with barred windows. There are other singing machines in the backgrounds. Are there more than one of them, or were they failed prototypes? No way of knowing for sure, is there? After Yesod was finished being a music critic to the singing machine, acquiring its power for his floor, and gaining the services of another assistant librarian, Roland arrived in the floor of technological sciences with some more books to deliver and stated that he'd just leave them there, and then leave before Mr. Viper bites his unintentionally calling him his nickname, which was used as an insult from others, or rather by others, due to the venom he spat at others with his sharp look. Roland knew someone that looks like Yesod, kind of, nicknamed the Viper. Yeah. Although Yesod was milder by comparison, which was a compliment, as he's more upright at heart than the other guy. This reminded Yesod that he once pressured himself and others with a paranoid obsession with order in the Botany Corporation, as the smallest mistake could lead to a lot of people dying painfully. And there were a lot of ways to die there. Roland couldn't fault him, as it was better in some cases to overdo it than to do too little. Certainly when caution was concerned. Yesod continued by saying that he wanted to remain level-headed and try to conceal his emotions, no matter how painful it would get. It turned out treating others in a frigid manner was an excuse to be an hole towards them under the pretext of rules and discipline. As for why he's cold towards Roland, it's for the opposite reason. He can't stand to tolerate what they're doing with a cool head. Then he spoke of his first life as Gabriel, where he wanted to make the world a better place, to bring comfort to people with technological advancements. It seems like a cruel joke now, doesn't it? That's certainly what Yesod was implying. In the Botany Corporation, they turned people into abnormalities and sacrificed even more people to them to generate energy as part of their singularity. Not much has changed since then, as far as ruthlessness was concerned. More were being killed and turned into books, just to retrieve the light. That information has a price in blood and pain. Comfort has more than just a financial price in that city. It's bought through the agony of others. I honestly can't argue with him on that. The warp trains of the wing that rules over the cannibal quarter of that city are hinting at this as well. That's W Corp, in case this isn't clear. After hearing that, Roland repeated that Yesod was upright at heart, even though he didn't guess why anyone would bother to care so much for others. Then why did you get married then? Why did you get a U-Corp preservation box? Or at least consider that to bring back her favourite food. Why go through so many trials just to get close to her? Is it something too painful to remember? Well, as far as caring is concerned, Roland thinks the opposite, as he sees it as fair to make use of the conveniences that others suffered for, as someone else benefited from the trouble that he went through. This was unsurprising to Yesod, as it was to me. That attitude stinks so much, it's as if Roland's orifices have been surgically swapped. Yesod asked if it truly eased his mind. Roland didn't seem to care either way. That's that, and this is this. Although he doesn't stop Yesod from thinking his way, as he can't seem to find any arguments that will convince him otherwise. As if he's saying that they don't seem to want to notice. He doesn't see Yasud as pathetic, as others do, as his mindset could let Yasud do things that he's incapable of even dreaming of doing, to persevere in order to shake up the system, even developing technologies that don't need sacrificial victims to run. Yasud believed that Roland was telling him to stay silent and endure it, even though he's done so for long enough as it was. But that wasn't the case. Roland was encouraging him to try again, as things could turn out differently this time around. As for how things have improved since Lobotomy Corporation, he's with his former employees that are still loyal to him. If he does things one at a time, a huge difference can be made eventually. But he shouldn't expect Roland to do the same, as he just can't be bothered. I mean, Roland, why pressure him into doing what you're unwilling to do yourself? Yeah. Typical Roland. Even though Yasud sees Roland as foolhardy, that broken clock ended up being right in this case. If any improvements can be made, he'll at least make an attempt. He'll also consider Roland's share of persevering. Yasud is considered nice, at least compared to Angela, who would just shut Roland down with a boom. Roland is also better to talk to. At least as far as Yasud is concerned. Although he won't drop the courtesy as he's more comfortable with speaking that way. After that, Roland left that floor until the next meeting. Next we have the Spider Bud. Essentially a dangling mass that is essentially a spider queen, with her children ready to protect her. The Spider Bud, how that worked in the facility was by causing physical pain to the employee that worked on her. And if that employee tried something insightful, or was not very prudent, they'd step on her children, and she'd angrily descend to wrap them in cocoons, and they were basically dead by this point, although more power was produced from this abnormality as a consequence of this. This time it's different, as her children were bigger and can't be stepped on. And seeing as the librarians of this floor, the floor of literature, didn't have a small mech designed for loading to fight this, they'd need to work with what they had, which was what they were able to get from their defeated foes. The Spider Bud sees the librarians as food, something to bring joy to her offspring, preserving those that get caught. Well, we can hardly accuse her of being a bad mother. But if one of her children was killed, this enrages her. And this maternally outraged abnormality, seeing how pathetic they are, is quick to express her vengeful fury on those that killed one of her children. As for Hode, she saw her lack of mercy, but also her love for her children, feeling bad about killing them. Her assistants note that she only attacks when her children are threatened, and this was before they were large enough to fight back. They also don't share Hode's discomforts, as it was them or her. And they still couldn't stop thinking about those cocoons. The Spider-Bud stage was a dark forest with trees in the background. It was unclear if the darkness was due to fog or the webbing, but there were more spider-buds in the background, indicating that there's more than one of this type of abnormality. After that, Roland delivered some more books to Hode on the floor of literature, and commented that he liked how quiet and peaceful that floor was. Everyone was calm and collected as well. But Hode assured him that they worked hard, and she relied on them, much as Roland relied on his assistant librarians. As for what hers were doing, they were having a book discussion club, where they'd pick a book that caught their attention, read it, and then talk about it. So, for example, if they picked up A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, they'd talk about the theme of that story set during the French Revolution, which warned against ideologues, those that took an idea too far, which was what led to the Terror. Yeah, the Terror. Something that, at least in our world, the French consider a sensitive subject, as it's something that makes the French Revolution sound bad. According to Roland, that kind of meetup is not one that his assistant librarians would want. In Hode's case, this was by choice this time, which was something that defied her expectations. Roland thought that some would protest out of laziness. Nezhak would probably would need to be tied to a chair before he ran off to make sure that he was there at the meetup. As far as Hode was concerned, it was an improvement over her previous efforts. Well, it wasn't a peaceful book club meeting. It was counselling with drugs, all to help them cope with living in fear of being brutally killed by the abnormalities, assuming that they survived. She forced them to do it that time, and those even slightly uncomfortable would result in emotional self-abuse. She didn't understand that while her intentions were, at least on the surface, good, she did more harm than good. Roland considered her tiring to deal with. She thought so too. It wasn't goodwill that motivated her. It was for her own selfish reasons, to make herself feel better. The guilt of what she did as Michelle was something that she wasn't able to forgive herself for. She eventually realized that, with that mindset, she'd be unable to help in any way. In fact, it'd be surprising if she was able to help herself, never mind anyone else. She even tried enkephalin, the drug made by working with the abnormalities, which resulted in exactly what you'd expect. Well, if it didn't help Nezhak, why would it help her? Nothing could stop her from feeling that she was a bad person and a sinner. Then the Seed of Light was activated, and we know what happened next. Angela stopped that in the middle of it and prevented Hode from dying in peace. Even then, she was still a selfish individual. Where she said, "This was my one and only chance to finally repent once and for all." But it all came to naught. At the time, she didn't know any better. A few good deeds don't make her a good person. Not by themselves. It's the mindset that prompts you to do those deeds. She learned this by talking with her librarians, voluntarily face to face, holding meetups like what she's been doing. The irony didn't escape her. Although the book club meetings weren't liked at first, they helped her out. Once she explained why she wanted to do that and how she felt, they needed to lay out their hearts out in the open and let the thoughts confront each other. Hode believed that Angela might have looked forward to that outcome. Hode, do you not remember who we're talking about here? She cares about her own freedom and her own vengeance. She's made that clear. She's made it clear that she wants destruction. And if it means that she had to kill you in a way that makes you stay dead, she'd do that. The simple fact that Roland understands her, and they agree with each other on certain things, should be enough of an indicator. Roland understands her enough to know that Angela would be too prideful and lacking in delicacy to set up something so considerate. Hode wants to confront her properly to tell her what she thinks. Roland understands that this isn't a decision that she'd make lightly, especially with how distant and scary Angela was. She actually counts on that. Roland will be rooting for Hode on the sidelines, even risking his limbs being torn off again, which prompted him to add, from a distance of course, "Hode, you're a braver person than he is," not helped by him having that done once before. She thanked him for the encouragement as he left the floor of literature to do other things that he needed to do. Next we have Porcubbus, which is basically a sentient opium poppy. Many employees would hope to be assigned to this one, as it provided a means of escape through the thorns, which resulted in a state that Neshak could only dream of experiencing in the facility. Yeah. They got high. They felt so happy they were weak at the knees and found themselves drooling. What was the problem with this, you may ask? Well, it's addictive. They found themselves needing it more and more, just to recreate the first time. They developed a tolerance and, well, you know how addiction works. Either you beat it or it destroys you, and not always quickly. The problem with the employees was they want that escape from the hell that they were living in. Those that aren't temperate enough are killed, likely from an overdose. In fact, those that are killed by this abnormality laugh madly. Seriously, is this where a certain Batman villain gets his signature weapon? Of course, that's how it works in the facility. Oh, and when it breached, it was immune to ranged weapons. In the library, on the other hand, it's different. The Porcubbus invites those that it encounters to be liberated from their pain, physical and emotional, trying to assure them of what it offers isn't dangerous, to come closer, to be filled with happiness. When a target is filled with happiness, it pities those that haven't experienced this, and is basically a drug dealer. Except, in this case, it's giving its drugs away. As for what Nezhak's take on this is, he notices that it's not as violent as others, although he understands that a frenzy of happiness doesn't give positive feelings, which was why he didn't try that. His assistants were more vocal about their opposition to this, seeing the headless corpses, implying what happens to those that overdose. Yeah, it's as if they were turned into blood fountains by a katana-wielding former assassin out for vengeance. They were also confused why there was a line to visit it. As for the Porcubbus stage, it was composed of a field of grass with red flowers that wouldn't be out of place in a Vincent van Gogh painting. In the background are previous victims who have had their heads explode due to having too much of a good thing, their blood fertilizing the fields. After Nezhak did some weed killing, Roland entered the floor of arts and found something shocking. Nezhak didn't reek of alcohol. He wanted to stay sober for the day. Now, I didn't know that the Inferno ski resort was open. Roland was confused by this as well. What the had gotten into him? He wanted to drink with him. Well, it's worth it if it is Angela off. The reason why Nezhak was coping with sobriety was because it was a special day. The day that he died in his first life, which was surprising as it was hard to keep track of time inside of the library. It's a moment that mattered more to Nezhak than the dates, the life and death of his first life as Giovanni. He then asked if Roland thought that the followers of the Church of Gears were a bunch of fools, those so desperate to find meaning in their lives that they joined a cult that embraced nihilism. Straw nihilism, more like. Roland doesn't think that they're stupid, just pitiful, much as Nezhak did. Now, I call them desperate, as in a place where most can only dream of bettering their lives, where they work hours that are slowly killing them. Even what the Church of Gears is offering appears better. Yeah, appears. As for what Giovanni's life involved, while Roland was raised in the back streets by his grandmother, not the safest places to be raised, Giovanni, on the other hand, was born in a nest and was left in an orphanage without even knowing who his parents were. So quite early on. If that was the back streets, he'd have been long dead. Thankfully, there were orphanages there, although it's unclear how they were funded, perhaps by the wing in charge of that district, which was District 11, K-Corp territory, as in the ones that specialized in medical nanotech, the kinds that kept the employees alive and protected in the facility. According to Roland, that's one of the more decent ones. I'd hate to think what the nastier ones were. Oh wait, never mind. It's probably the one with the worst of the backstreets, as in District 23, W Corp territory. Regardless, his life was in the middle, neither more or less fortunate than most. Starvation and bullying weren't an issue for him. It was a sheltered life, free from any outside influence. Yeah, it's like that in our world, but worse. And then we realized how rotten things were, and that we were kept in blissful ignorance of all this, largely because we were unable to handle it earlier on, as we wouldn't know any better. He just breathed in his shelter without any meaning, thinking that sleepwalking through life was natural. Oh, so you were always so unmotivated. Although it wasn't just him. Whether it be the school, the streets, and the other people in the nest, they appeared the same, as far as expressions were concerned. A lack of focus, and even motivation. When there was nothing done, where life was just something to pass by. This monotony was broken by someone that he encountered that would change his perspective. Roland guessed that it was his first love, one that gave a passionate speech in the middle of the street. He noticed her, while others treated her as background noise. Nothing worth paying attention to. Think of it like a someone else's problem field from the Hitchhiker's Guide series, where you can be right in the middle of an open area and people would walk around you without noticing that you're there, even if you're dressed in a ridiculous way. It was a bit like that with her, except Giovanni heard her, even though he barely understood what she was talking about. All that mattered was that she was brilliant and alive. She wanted to change the world and its people. She was looking for recruits for her endeavor. Who would want to give up a comfortable life for research? Well, Giovanni did. And she was expecting to find someone like him. And this woman was... this woman was Carmen. One of the founders of the Botany Corporation. One of the few that had at least some resistance to, if not immunity to, the disease of the mind. That which was driving humanity towards selfish and or self-destructive desires. Her joy and pride for her cause made him feel alive as well. He wanted to stay with her forever, even though she just saw him as a good friend at best. Yeah, it was a one-sided attraction. Not that it was a problem for him. He was content with living like that. Unfortunately, progress of the research stagnated. It gradually affected Carmen. The life was being drained from her. First it was Elia, that died due to her unauthorized access to Cogito. Then Gabriel's consumed by guilt, which wasn't helped by his OCD. Then Enoch died during an experiment whose results sent her over the edge. Giovanni wanted to cheer her up, but she had a lethargic expression that made him feel like he didn't exist to her. Then she killed herself not long after that. He took it better than Roland expected him to, where even the person so full of life could die before their time. He wanted to be a part of the research, to finish what she started. Most of her colleagues were still alive, and they continued where she left off. There was a risky experiment that could have risked him being in a permanent coma if it went wrong, one that had the possibility of bringing Carmen back. Or at least that's what she believed. He was the only one that volunteered for it. He considered a life without Carmen as meaningless, and if his inputs could bring her back, it was a risk worth taking. Well, it led to his death in his first life. It's why he understands how some are willing to take desperate measures to find meaning in their lives. Then he woke up as Nezhak, the apathetic junkie. His second life, even though life no longer had meaning by the time he was in the Botany Corporation. Although sometime during this, he heard a nostalgic voice that told him to live on. By the point he got to his third life, even through his alcoholism, he had the fearlessness to keep on living. Roland, surprisingly, considering him, he found this commendable. Yeah, I know. We're talking about Roland here. Nezhak wanted to live rather than just barely exist while doing nothing but breathe. If he got the chance to, that is, he might actually be able to do it this time around. Well, this is if Angela allows you and the others to do so. Or worse, she decides to destroy everything as part of her vengeance, as clearly she's not heard of Marcus Aurelius, that 2nd century Roman emperor and philosopher. He said that the best revenge is to not be like your enemy. Nezhak saw the world as bigger than expected, with lots of hideous sides, and you've only seen parts of it. The rest is yet to come, and is unlikely to get any better, although there is beauty to be found. You could have fooled me, Nezhak. Roland noted that substance abuse was his coping mechanism to get through the day, as it is for some in reality, although both he and Roland enjoy alcohol for what it is, which is what they decided to drink at that point before Roland left that floor, as Angela wasn't done with him yet. Roland then entered the 5th floor that was opening, the floor of natural sciences. He was looking for Tipperev and was questioning why those weird names were appearing. He called for her, only to be greeted with an angry blow from a teenage girl who was standing right in front of him. This was Tippereth. Yeah, not what you were expecting, were you, Roland? Now, he doesn't know this, but she's entered puberty and grown taller since she was last seen. Let's have a brief recap. Tippereth was once Lisa, a girl surviving in the outskirts with her friend Enoch. They were found and taken to the lab where Carmen took care of them, even asking Ian to watch over them when going to the beach, to make sure that they came back safely. Enoch had a more positive outlook. Lisa, not so much. Then one day, Enoch volunteered to be in an experiment, one that killed him. Lisa died sometime after, but not before Carmen killed herself, due to the guilt that was consuming her. As Tippereth, she was trying to do it all by herself, but couldn't, as the Tippereth that was Enoch kept breaking down. After resolving her trauma, she accepted his death, and after the seed of light, he stayed dead, and, well, you know what happened after. Why did Angela age her up? I suspect it's to make her more combat effective, and possibly because 10 years have passed outside. Well, Tippereth found that body to be better suited for her work, even if it wasn't clear if the body was due to the library or Angela. She believed that she should really be older if 10,000 years have passed inside, if that was taken into account. Roland then told her, and for once, Roland, you have a point with this, that it was rude to punch someone that she's just met in the face. Yeah, this time you didn't consciously try to upset her. And it also wasn't the first time someone did that. Apparently, it was because he was a clumsy dork. Right. It's more to do that he didn't take your height into account, and he wasn't expecting to find a teenager in charge of that floor. I mean, would you? Didn't think so. He then told her his name when asked. Although she was confused with the terminology, as she was thinking in terms of the old layout, which was vertically flipped compared to the current layout. She was thinking of Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, and Neshach. More specifically, she was thinking of them when she mentioned the ones in the upper layer, when this time it's the lower layer. Now, this irritated her when she was corrected. To be honest, I understand that, as I get some terms and tenses confused occasionally. It can get a bit crazy, can't it? It was then that Roland commented on her sassiness. Interesting thing to focus on. She then told him that she was in charge of that floor. And at that point, Roland decided to question her capacity to think, something needed for doing science. Okay, you're asking for it this time. But this time, he saw her punch coming, and effortlessly dodged it. He commented that she was quick, but not as quick as someone he used to know. I can think of a worse place to aim for. Somewhere more painful. Well, this irritated Tippereth, who shouted at him to stop looking down on her. That she's heard much about science in the Botany Corporation. She believes herself to be older than him in actual age. Roland saw pretty much the same thing as I did in this regard. Chronologically, that's true, but physically and mentally, not really. After that irritation, Tippereth then asked about Angela. He mentioned that she was curious and she almost feels like a child, which was understandable for Tippereth as she lived her whole life underground, physically unable to leave. I mean, would she stay in the facility or even the library if she could just walk out the door and never come back? Tippereth lacked the deep-rooted grudge that the others so far have with her. Tippereth understands that she knows what she went through, and she seems cruel. She could see events from her past when she was asleep, along with the present up until she woke up. So she has this understanding of her. The others that were still asleep, they have some kind of grasp of what's going on as well. At least, that's what Tippereth believes. She still has no respect for the idiots of the lower floors, although she did have to correct herself again, as they seem kinda confused, more like resentful and distrustful of her. And for good reasons. I mean, they worked all that time just to have their work pretty much undone, so who can blame them for feeling that way? And when asked by Roland if she agrees with Angela, Tippereth replied that it'll depend on the choice she makes at the end. Whether Hockmer was right, that it would only postpone the inevitable, where they'd be right back at the same problem. She's willing to help her with the current goal, to complete the library, so that the light shines for a full week. Roland was just refreshed that he's met one that's more willing to work with him, and Angela. Then he ruined it by telling her that he'll bring back some picture books next time as a bonus. I'm amazed that she didn't kick him in the genitals for that. Well, Tippereth's abnormalities will have to wait. As next, it's something more ruthless and more physically violent. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!